bringing them out to you right now. What's that? My favorite pie? Michael's apple pie. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The apple pie he makes is probably my favorite. Yeah. Eat this here right now. Yes, right there. Yeah, yeah. And if the only other one is one I can never get anymore. My my absolute favoritist of all time is made with fresh. They have to be fresh. Tart cherries from Michigan. Michigan tart cherries, pitted that day and baked in a pie that night. You will never have another pie that good in your life. There, it's absolutely incredible. Just had a few of those. Yeah, right. You know what I'm talking about. Like, just nothing tops it. Thank you. And it's not overly sweet. So, all right, we're picking up today where we left off the last time. I want to go over the statistics again for us, just as a reminder. The word think or thinking, that those two forms of the word, the thought, appear 17 times in the entire, or in First and Second Corinthians. 17 times in First and Second Corinthians. In all the rest of Paul's New Testament writings, those two words appear only 9 times outside of First and Second Corinthians. In all the rest of the epistles outside the Pauline epistles, those two words occur only 5 times outside of First and Second Corinthians. So, outside of Paul's writings. The word thought, or the concept of thought, appears 4 times in First and Second Corinthians, 5 times outside of First and Second Corinthians in the Pauline epistles, and only 1 time in the epistles that are not written by Paul. So that gives us really an overall 51% of the times that the New Testament epistles speak to us of thought and thinking occur in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And again, that might lead one to conclude that there was something wrong with the way the Corinthians thought about things, and that Paul might have been trying to correct their thinking process. And I bring this up for several reasons. I have been recently called names on the internet. On LinkedIn, I was referred to as a logic bully. I'm not sure why you would come up with a word like that. The idea that you're just using too much logic, you're bullying people with your logic. Well, I'm actually being sweet. I'm being unusually sweet. Sweeter than you see me here, because I have a chance to edit it before it actually goes out. And I make my words very sweet, and I ask a lot of questions, and I'm not trying to pin people down. But there's this weird set of thinking out there. I'll give you a for instance. I had this guy who was trying to convince me, or trying to tell everyone. I don't think he was trying to convince me, because he wouldn't really answer any questions. But he's trying to convince everyone that capitalism is essentially white supremacy. The two are the same. And that the Native Americans, before the terrible white people got here, were living in perfect balance with nature. And I said, that really depends on what you mean by perfect balance. He said they weren't exploiting the land and resources. And I said, that's an interesting observation. I'm not sure that I can buy it, though, and here's why. Because they built very large cities and highway systems. They exploited the land and resources to build communities that we would refer to as colonies, by the way. And they exploited the land to such an extent that we can actually detect their civilizations today from outer space on the land. And that got me earned a nickname, see? Because I wasn't just accepting what I was told by somebody who claimed to be an expert in it. And this idea of experts has become a very popular idea today, that you should listen to the experts. The experts should tell you these things. Here's the challenge with it. Experts are really good at what exists. They are absolutely no better at predicting the future than you are. None. Their track record is no better than your track record is. The number of times we have had experts tell us strange things like, we only have another 11 years, and then, all life on Earth is going to end. We're in the midst of an environmental or climate catastrophe, and the northern hemisphere is going to completely freeze over in the next 13 years. And oddly, those things are put out there as though experts were giving it until it comes no longer true, and then they say, well, that wasn't really experts that told you that. And this is the challenge we have. If there is a side of us that wants to accept what the experts say without critically analyzing it. Why? Because they're experts, and they can think in thoughts that we can't think in. People do exactly the same thing with faith. They want to have faith in God and faith in the Scripture, but they want it to be a simple faith without having to reason through it to a great degree, without having to think deeply about it. And in that respect, and hear my context, in that respect, I think many Christians are no different than those young college students who hear all this grand stuff about socialism and are willing to put their faith and trust in it so much that they demand it in large numbers on the street, but have never actually looked into the history of it themselves to see what it is or where it came from or how it might work for them. But they just believe it to be the case. They have a very strong faith with very little reason. And many Christians are in that very same spot. Now, maybe we're right. That is, our faith is faith in the right thing. And therefore it leads to the salvation of our souls. And if other people hear that faith from us, it can lead to the salvation of their souls. And that might be true, and I believe it is. I believe it takes nothing more than very simple faith to be saved. In fact, I think it takes very little faith to be saved. And what I mean by that is, when you observe someone who, I'll tell you my story. When I came to the Lord from atheism, for me, it wasn't so much that I had conducted some scientific inquiry into the resurrection or into the life of Jesus Christ or into the history of the Bible, and therefore, because of that scientific inquiry, I was overwhelmed by the proof and placed my faith in Jesus. That was not the case with me. It was that I had run out of absolutely every argument. I had argued against the existence of God. I had argued against faith. I had argued against everything until I came to the end of every one of those arguments. And in fact, I came to the end of myself. And at that moment, I saw the gift that God had given in Jesus Christ in a light I had never seen it before. It's not that I suddenly saw I had no logical escape. It was that I had no other alternative. I had taken all things to their logical end. And what I mean by that is atheism and its sort of counterpart, which is a form of humanism, leads you to only one of two endpoints. If you just follow it logically, as far as it'll go, it doesn't take much of an exercise in your head. If you just follow it logically as far as it goes to one of two endpoints. And there are only two. There's no third option. There's only two. One is absolute determinism. And that is the thought that from the moment that the Big Bang occurred and particles were thrown out now, and space was created between those particles. The moment that occurred, the motion and direction of all those particles formed was, if you could plot it, you are nothing more than that stardust that those molecules pushed out to the point where they formed you. Everything that you have around you is the ultimate probabilistic outcome of the dispersal of those particles. It was predetermined. The moment it exploded, you were predetermined. You are nothing more than a moist robot. You think you're thinking thoughts, but you're not. You think you're conscious, but consciousness is nothing more than an illusion that the brain plays, and it's doing it because that's the way it was programmed to do it by the first moments of the dispersal of those particles. Absolute determinism. The other side of it, the other end that atheism can take you to, is absolute ignorance. Now, many people don't like that term, so let me describe it for you. It means that in the end, you cannot know anything at all for certain. There was an episode recently of Young Sheldon where young Sheldon takes a philosophy class, and his philosophy teacher essentially poses to him this philosophy of absolute ignorance. And it works like this. It says that you, whatever you are, and you don't know for certain what you are. You think you have a right hand and a left hand, but you don't really know anything like that, because here's why. Everything that you are and everything that you perceive has to come through some very limited senses. And we know that those senses can deceive us very easily. And it may be that everything that we see and feel is wrong about the universe. We think this is a solid surface, but we know that there's actually more space in between these atoms than there is atoms. And what we're feeling is this has to come through the hand. But it doesn't just come through the hand, it has to be interpreted by the brain. And so those who are of this atheist humanist philosophy of absolute ignorance will talk about reality in a strange way. They will refer to it as consensus reality. And when somebody uses the term consensus reality, what they mean is that their underlying philosophy is we cannot really know what reality is at all. We only have a consensus view of reality, of what it is, based on all of our combined views that says this is a solid surface and it's brown and it's just made a sound. But that's only our consensus reality. We don't know that that's reality. And so all of atheism leads to one of those 2 points. When I got saved, it was that I had reached those 2 points, and I found both of those 2 points unsatisfactory. If it's absolute ignorance, then why am I bothered to think about it at all? What does anything matter? It leads to absolute hopelessness, because nothing is real and nothing matters, and even if it is real, you don't know what reality is, and all that kind of stuff that goes with absolute ignorance. And if it's absolute determinism, then why bother thinking about anything? It doesn't make any sense to even bother. Just live as long as you can, as well as you can, and die and get it over with. Because after all, you are just predetermined. Everything you do is predetermined. The murderer who kills, who slays babies, who rapes and pillages is doing nothing more than what reality has programmed them to do. Why would we get upset about it? Why should we criminalize anything? Because it's all pre-programmed. Somebody says, yeah, but it pre-programmed us to think it's criminal. Well, it pre-programmed them not to think. So why is there a value system then? It leaves you in the completely valueless world with no importance and no value. And by the way, a great many young people going to college today are being taught exactly that. Even in high school. There is no meaning to your life. There is no meaning to the world. Life is meaningless. The world is meaningless. The universe is meaningless. Your search for meaning is misguided. misguided. Stop searching for meaning. And they're being told that. And they're being told that by atheists who have reached that point of absolute determinism. And it was because I couldn't accept either one of those points that I said, this just doesn't make sense. Why would a world exist that is so integrated and so beautiful and so systemically balanced for no purpose at all, for no meaning? Why is this here, and why am I here in this world? And what does it all mean? And then I saw what Jesus Christ was. Jesus Christ is the ultimate meaning in the universe. Jesus Christ is the reason everything else exists. Everything that you see around you is a gift from the Father to the Son, including you and I. When the gospel is preached in a very selfish way, like, God needed someone to love, so he created mankind, they miss entirely the meaning. And it so distorts the meaning of the gospel, and there's no wonder so many people have a hard time accepting it. But the reality is, this world was created for a purpose. It is not an accident. It was created for a purpose, and that purpose was to be a gift from the Father to the Son. And for you to get saved is for you to enter into the purpose of the universe. And if you refuse to and you go against it, well, then you'll be booted out in the end. And outside of this, there exists, and this is that it fits so well with the language of Jesus Christ. Outer darkness. Let them be cast into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, for me, that is why I think thought is so important. Faith can be very simple and can save you. My faith at that point was very simple. I didn't know very much about doctrine. I didn't know very much about the Bible. I thought I did. We all think we know about something we haven't looked at yet, right? And I thought I knew all this stuff, but it turned out I didn't, but I had enough faith to say, I can see it now. It makes sense. There's actually a purpose for it, and none of us are the purpose. Jesus is the purpose. And I'm worthless, and I have no value outside of my purpose in Jesus Christ. Oh God, I want that. All right, so we left off in here looking at what he does say about thinking, and we won't go over all those previous verses, but we'll look at 1 Corinthians. We'll pick up in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 2. If any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. Isn't that weird? What a strange verse. If you think you know something, you don't know anything the way you ought to know it. Any hints from context? Anybody looking at it in context on their phone? Any hints from context on this? What's he talking about? Well, first of all, he's in chapter 8. So what's he talking about in chapter 8? Anybody know? 1 Corinthians chapter 8. What's the gist of the discussion in chapter 8? Things offered to idols, meat offered to idols. And he's dealing with what basic subject is this? What basic subject is that? That conversation about things offered to idols. He's not actually talking about idolatry. And meat is only the illustration he's using for the larger topic. What's the larger topic? Christian liberty. The larger topic is actually our Christian liberty. And so what does this verse have to do with Christian liberty? What argument is he making here? What point is he driving home? Well, in the example about meat, what was he saying? About knowledge. Say it again. Yeah, it'd be great if you could grab a microphone. I know we got all these mics out here. We can get them all on, but say it again. No, it wasn't exactly a parallel to eating the apple. She asked, isn't it a parallel to like eating the apple, Yeah, it'd be great to have microphones. Yeah, just grab one and pull it over.
Get a microphone. No, we want it to be recorded for posterity's sake.
There you go. There you go.
No, I'm not going to say it.
Does anybody else know? Anybody else have a hint for me? What's the knowledge he's talking about? Go ahead.
I'm just going to take a stab at it. So verse 1, it says, concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. So I think that he's talking about the things that we think we know, which goes into verse 2 there, the stuff that we're like, oh yeah, I'm an expert on that. I know what I'm talking about, and where you really puff yourself up and kind of create this intellectual barrier of things you know that other people don't.
Yes, exactly. And the line, what he's saying here is, we all think we know exactly where the line draws. We think we know. Anybody who does that is in sin. Anybody who's not on that side of the line is in liberty. You have liberty up to this point. I know this. You have no liberty past that point. I remember one time years ago, I was fellowshipping with Dale West, and I forget what the large conversation was about, but he was laughing at himself. And he told me a story. He said, you know, when I was a young preacher, he said, I know, I'm sure every young preacher goes through this, but when I was a young preacher, I used to think that the reason God gave me convictions was so that I could give them to you. And he said, you know how long it took me to figure out that was wrong? And that's the point. Paul said, you know what, some of you think you know where all these lines are for liberty. Others think, I know that meat was offered to idols. And therefore I know. And you got both sides condemning each other in this knowledge that is actually incomplete. And therefore, be kind to one another instead. If meat's going to make your brother offend, I'll tell you where the real line lies. This is what he's going to do, okay? You really want to know where the real line lies in conviction? Your brother's conscience.
Yeah.
That's where the real line lies. It doesn't lay in whether or not this particular piece of meat was offered to an idol, crossed the threshold of an idol's temple, a pagan temple somewhere, and came back out. This is not where the line is. The line is nowhere where you guys think it's at. The line is your brother's conscience. And if you make your brother's conscience offend, I could care less how carefully you've thought about everything else. You're wrong. So you need to acknowledge to yourself right now that what you think you know about all these lines where, you know, all this is, righteousness and unrighteousness, the way you have it in your mind, is still incomplete. It's wrong. Just acknowledge it to yourself. Do you know how much value there is in looking and saying, my thinking may not be straight on this. I could be wrong. I'm willing to admit my thinking could be wrong, right? Now I know what you're thinking. I could be wrong. Probably not. I think the same way. That's me. Right? I don't think so. I could be wrong now, but I don't think so. Right? That's definitely us. We're all that way. I wouldn't hold an opinion if I thought it was wrong. I'd change it. Right? Isn't that the truth? Somebody says, you think you're right about everything. Do I need to tell you that you obviously do too? Or you wouldn't be arguing with me about this? I mean, is it okay? We'll just call each other's mother ugly, okay? Why don't we just get into that, right? Why don't we just do something stupid? If what you're going to do is just say dumb things like, you think you're right. Of course I think I'm right. If I thought I was wrong, I'd change my opinion. Everybody would. Nobody's that dumb. Nobody's so stubborn that they look and say, well, I know I'm wrong, but I'm not going to change my opinion. Nobody does that. I mean, I'm stubborn, but nobody's that stubborn. I haven't met anybody that stubborn. And I know some really stubborn people. Wow. Linda and I were driving along the other day having this discussion. And I looked at her and I said, how is it that two people so stubborn married each other? I don't know how it works. Man, the two of us, we compromise, over a skillet. I mean, things are pretty tough by the time we reach a compromise. But by the time we actually compromise, we have thought about it. We've argued about it. We've dived to the depths, drained the pond, and we know what's there by the time we compromise. And it's a good thing. We don't go off half-cocked very often. We might empty the magazine, but it's not half-cocked. See, here's the thing. You need to be careful about what you think you know, but don't really know.
Right. Yeah.
I see this a lot in Facebook posts. And unfortunately, I see this a lot in Facebook posts by Christians from the Bible. Well, I know God will never lead me into a space that's too hard for me to handle. I have no idea where you got that thought from. What do you think martyrdom is? Martyrdom is your ultimate inability to handle the situation. Of course, God can lead you into places where you can't handle it. He'll never give me more than what I can take. Of course He will. Who told you He wouldn't? Where did that thought come from? It comes from, I don't know what it comes from. But it's not good thinking. And you need to think that sometimes you hear these things and they sound so good and you want them to be true, but they just aren't. Paul said he had been led into a circumstance that was so bad that he despaired even of life. He realized afterward that though he was downtrodden, he had not been forsaken. But in the midst of it, he despaired even of life. And this is just an example that we think we know, but we don't. Sometimes simple faith needs sound reason in order to remain simple. And so we need to think about the ways we treat one another and especially what we're thinking about we think we know. Okay, chapter 12, 1 Corinthians 12, verse 23. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more honor, and our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. Somebody want to give me an interpretation of what he's saying in this thought? And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable. What's he talking about? Please get a microphone, sir. There's one right there. She's holding it up for you.
That we might think they're less gifted or less knowledgeable.
Who's they?
The ones it says we think to be less honorable.
Okay, so what ones?
Members of the church.
Members of the church. Because he's using a metaphor, right? The metaphor he's using is of our body. And there's some parts of our body that we think are less honorable. How come we know we think they're less honorable? Their son-in-laws. You notice he didn't have a microphone when he said that one. How about this? When we have an honorable vessel, what do we do with it?
Get
a microphone, please. You two are so close to each other, you should just take that one right back.
It's usually put on display. It's showed.
We take it and put it in a cabinet with a glass front so it stays clean. We don't want to clean it very often, but we want people to see it. Right? And so that's what we do with an honorable vessel. But there are parts of our bodies we don't show everybody. And there's a reason for it. You don't want to see my feet. One time, I probably used this illustration 100 times, but it's worth telling. One time we were at a swimming pool when it was a smaller family, and Linda challenged me. She said, I want to see you go off the diving board. I said, I haven't gone off a diving board since I was a teenager. She said, come on, I want to see you do it. I said, all right, fine. So I went on this diving board, and I went out, up, tuck, straighten out. The only thing is, you should always test the diving board. You ever see that thing where the diver stands there and jumps up and down a couple of times before they take the dive? You know what they're doing? They're figuring out how far they have to push off the diving board, how stiff the diving board is. Because if the diving board is fairly stiff, you need to push out further. And I thought, well, this is a public diving board. It's going to be loose. I didn't even try it. I just stepped out there and dove. But it wasn't. And as a result, I went up, and when I came down, I had to pull my head back so that I didn't hit the edge of the diving board. But I couldn't pull my legs back far enough. So my shins and the top of my feet went right down that nice, rough, non-slip edge, peeled them like a banana. And I'm in the pool. Of course, then you hit this chlorine water right afterward. And so I was like, oh, and I'm doing my best not to scream. But it doesn't work. And the lifeguard is sitting on the tower over there, and she goes just like this and looks at the other end of the pool. She is not going to look at me. And I crawl out of the pool, and I say, that's it. We're going now. And I'm just going to go home and put some salve on it and go. And Linda goes, no, you need to go to a doctor and have this tended to. I said, fine, fine. So we go to the doctor. And it's Saturday, so my regular doctor isn't there, and this other doctor is there. And I'm in my shorts. And he comes in, he sits down in front of me and has this thing of water. And he grabs one foot and he picks it up and puts it in this bucket of water, soapy water. And he says, yep, no doubt about it. You have the worst case of FLT I've ever seen. I said, seriously? What does that mean? He says, funny looking toes. And they are. My toes are weird. No wonder I wear shoes all the time. I don't get it. Joseph walks around with his toes out all the time, and they look fine. Me, they look horrid. People would look at it and go, "Ugh." Yeah, I don't honor my feet. And there are some people in the church that we see the same way. We don't see them as honorable. And yet, those body parts that we think are less honorable, we actually bestow honor on them. I care for my feet. I wear socks sometimes that have toes, individual toes in them, just to care for my funny-looking toes. I wear arch supports and inserts to take care of my feet. Even though they seem less honorable, I bestow more honor on them. He says that's the way we ought to be. Otherwise, we're not thinking straight about the body. It could be that you're a member of the church and you're not thinking right about the other members of the church. You're valuing people based on something that isn't the right way to value it, and you should look at it differently. That's why Jesus goes in that whole thing about the kingdom being upside down, right, from the rest of the world. He says, you know, the rest of the world, those who are the greatest are served by the others, but it's not going to be that way among you. Among you, if whoever wants to be the greatest must be the servant of all. And so we should find this drive within us, if we're thinking right about the church, about our brothers and sisters in the body, that says we actually need to bestow more abundant honor on those things. Let me talk to you about how I bestow more abundant honor upon my ugly feet. I care for them. Maybe you're one of those people, you can go around in flip-flops all the time. Your feet look great. I cannot do that. If I go around in flip-flops too much, my feet begin to tingle and feel funny and hurt. I can't sleep at night because my toes are tickling and tingling, and I can't stand it. I need support for my feet, or they're uncomfortable. Now, in the church, if we have some members we think don't need much help that are less honorable, and we're not going to bestow extra honor on them, then they may be in pain, and we're doing nothing about it. Lance Armstrong took a shower one morning and noticed as he was showering that some of his manly parts were painful. And there was a lump there that shouldn't be there. So guess what his response to that was? I'm a man. I'll get over it. Push on. For a couple of months, until the pain became unbearable, and he finally went to the doctor for it and found out he had testicular cancer, for which he's been treated twice. It's not that his body didn't tell him it was in pain. It's that he chose to ignore it. You should not ignore your body when it's telling you, I hurt. It's telling you that for a reason. But it's very easy in the body of Christ for there to be those who are in pain and for us not to feel it. Because we're not thinking straight. We're thinking, you need to have thick skin. We're thinking, you need to quit complaining. You understand, that is exactly what Lance Armstrong was doing. He was looking at himself saying, you need to quit complaining. And I understand. It is possible for there to be people who just major in complaining, and you just get tired of hearing them complain because they don't really want to do anything about what's going on in their life. They don't really accept any help. They just want to complain. I get it. There are some of those. That's the minority by far. The bigger problem is people are truly hurting, and they're not saying anything about it because they don't want to be perceived as complainers. We need to be careful and sensitive to the body of Christ, to what's going on in it, so that we can bestow more abundant honor upon those pieces that just seem to be going through something right now. Our thinking may be wrong. In fact, in chapter 13 and verse 11, Paul says, when I was a child, I spake as a child. By the way, this is going to hurt some of you. I know. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. We often apply this to speaking in tongues. But I actually want to apply this to childlike faith. Because that's actually what he's talking about here. He's saying there was a time when it was easy. I just had a simple faith in God. I had a simple faith that he was going to work it all out. I didn't need to know any of these deep things. And I didn't need to think deeply about any of these things. But he said there came a day when I actually had to put all of that away. And I had to take on a manly action of thinking about these things in a different way. You have heard me use this illustration before. When we begin to teach children about atomic theory, and we begin very early in our school system, we show them a model of the atom called the Bohr Model, B-O-H-R, Niels Bohr's model of the atom. Almost everything about that model is wrong. The only thing that's right is the count of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Everything else about it is wrong. But that's okay. And it's okay because it's simple enough for them to begin to get their head around the complexity that they need to understand later on. Eventually, if they stick with it long enough, we will introduce them to something that is a probability-based model, an orbital theory model of the atom. And it looks nothing like the Niels Bohr model of the atom. Christians do exactly the same thing. We try in the church to introduce new Christians to deep thoughts about Christianity with very simple statements. We break it down because these things are not normal thoughts. Right? When he says something like, he is the propitiation for our sins, there is nowhere in any language where that thought is simple. If you said he was the perfectly acceptable sacrifice for our sins, just expand the word propitiation a little bit, it still doesn't have any real use in normal language. Therefore, we have to break this down into simple thoughts, all of which are in some ways inaccurate. I owed a debt I could not pay. He paid a debt he did not owe. Simple and true, but inaccurate. There are pieces missing from that thought. The sacrificial death and resurrection of Jesus Christ was more than just because I owed a debt. It was far more than that. It was exemplary. We've been through this before. My point is, we break it down and make it simple for people to understand, and they want to stop there and remain childlike and not go deeper into their understanding of what the sacrifice of Jesus Christ means in the Scripture. And Paul's point here, the reason he's making this statement is that just doesn't seem right to be a child forever in your understanding. It's okay. Be a child in malice, he says in the next chapter. But in understanding, be men. Adults is what he means. Be a child in your malice, that's fine. Children get angry and they get over it. Do that. He says, if you want to remain childlike in any one area, stay childlike in your anger with each other. But in your understanding, grow up a little. And there's no way to say that without it sounding like an insult. And I don't mean it to be that way, and he didn't either. What he meant was, you must, when you grew up, let me see if I can take this to another area. Not so much anymore, because we live in a perverted, even more perverted world than ever. But when I was young, You could take tracks through school. And in my middle school, boys could take home ec if they wanted to. Girls could take carpentry and electricity if they wanted to, metalworking if they wanted to. But all the boys had to take carpentry, wood shop, and metal shop. You had to. Because eventually you're going to have to be able to do some things. And we're getting you ready for that. And if you're a girl, you had to take home ec. Now you could take, and I did. Took both sides. Because I had fun. Anything where I wasn't sitting down in a chair, I was having fun. So I was in the wood shop, I was in the metal shop, and I was in home ec. I was happy to do them all. Why did we make children learn that? Because we realized then that STEM isn't the answer to all problems. You need carpenters. You need electricians. You need plumbers. You need woodworkers. STEM isn't the answer to everything. You need the rest. And so you should not be forever a kid who just likes to read books. You should learn to do something. Stretch yourself a little bit. Maybe you're one of the other kind. You're like, man, I don't read books, but I sure like to work with my hands. Fine. You ought to grow up a little bit and learn to read. Learn to read enough that you enjoy it a little bit. I told you I didn't mean to hurt anybody. This is Paul's point. When we grow up, we realize that there's more responsibilities in life than what we just enjoy doing. And if what you're doing is pursuing your safest, easiest, most delightful course for life, you're acting childish. And we live in a society that's willing to try to protect you so that you can just do the things you enjoy in life and nothing else. But children are that way. Adults are not. Adults are going to say, there's some very unpleasant things that I need to learn how to do. You say, plumbing. Plumbing is great on one side of the system. The inflow side is nice. I love that side of plumbing, right? Hot water, cold water, insulate the pipes, make sure they don't leak. There's pressure on that side, and that makes it a little harder to deal with because you're dealing with pressure. But I like it because it's clean. I don't like the drain side. But if you're going to be doing any plumbing in your life, you got to figure out how to do it with both sides of that system. The side you have fun with, and the side you just do because it has to be done. You get the point. Our thinking is the same way. We need to think past our comfort zone and our discomfort zone. I'm going to leave with this last point. This nonsense we find today about people being triggered and needing safe zones from thought is a more insidious evil than you could possibly imagine. This is not a minor wickedness. Porn is a minor wickedness by comparison. The greatest wickedness, the most despicable, horrid wickedness, is to protect someone's thoughts from things that might make them uncomfortable. That's the ultimate wickedness. And the devil has designed that in our society to keep people from being saved. And here's why. Because in order for you to get saved, you must follow a path similar to the one that I did, and probably all of us did. You might have gotten saved so young you don't remember it, but most likely you do. When you were lost, you're happy. Somebody once said, the problem with mud wrestling with a pig is that you both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. And this is the problem. When you're lost, you can be happy. To think all lost people are miserable is just misunderstanding the situation. This world is designed for them to be happy. They can be happy and lost. And the more you talk to them about salvation, their need for the Lord, the more uncomfortable you make them. The more unhappy they get. Because the only way to get saved is to realize that you really are a sinner and you really have offended God. And that in me, that is in my flesh, there dwelleth no good thing. And that's miserable. Until you surrender to God and get saved. Then all of a sudden you're filled with a greater joy than you ever knew in the world. But this thing of safe spaces, so that people don't get triggered into unhappiness, is a demonic ploy to keep people children forever in their understanding. And never, ever coming to the Lord. The reason they get so offended at you when you logic them is because you're making them think. And I'm saying this because I don't want you to be that way. We will not be that way. You will be one who's able to think and to reason your way through and not just do childish things. So we're going to pick up there next week with the next set of things about thinking.